Amanda Larkin, who is Chief Executive of the South Western Sydney Local Health District. Danny Rezek is the Managing Partner of Deloitte Western Sydney. Michael Cullen, who is the Regional General Manager for Western Sydney TAFE New South Wales, and Paul Walker, who is Development Director, Retail and Mixed Use GPT Group. Now, I was going to join them, but I'm going to stay here. I've been instructed by Paul not to start with Paul, so I won't, but I was going to. Anyway, Danny, I'll start with you if I can. Your firm was among the first of its type to open an office in Western Sydney. Given the acknowledged benefits of co-location agglomeration, are enough businesses following suit? What more needs to happen to make sure that you're joined by plenty more people, plenty more firms?
Look, I think it's certainly we're seeing that happening now. There's definitely a sense of momentum about Western Sydney. We're seeing more professional services firms. Our competitors are actually coming into the marketplace. We're seeing people like the NAB choose to make one of their key centres of excellence based in Parramatta. So I think the positive signs are definitely there, but equally I would say we have not yet won. There is more to be done about attracting business, and I think it comes down to actually articulating the benefits and the advantages that Western Sydney has, and I think that when that is really done effectively, I think that will open the eyes of a lot more business people about the opportunity and why, if they're not there, they're going to miss out.
Government departments moving out there obviously is one catalyst. What else would you like to see?
I think it's a portfolio. It has to be a blend of public and private sector. I mean, today there's something like 115,000 registered businesses across all of Western Sydney. 97% of those have 20 or fewer employees. So really, Western Sydney is the heart of small business, but what we're starting to see is a lot more multinationals, a lot more of the large ASX-listed companies coming out. And I think it's getting that portfolio of businesses because they will attract different skills and talents, and that will help improve, I guess, the fabric and the quality of opportunity and career pathways for many others.
Career pathways leads me nicely to Michael Cullen from TAFE New South Wales. Are we in the right spaces in terms of what we're providing, opportunities, educational opportunities we're providing, to make sure that businesses in Western Sydney, new and existing, have access to the staff, the talent pool, the trained people, the skilled people they need?
I'd probably like to flip that a little bit, actually. I think one of the real assets of Western Sydney is we actually have the talent pool. We've actually got the young people. Our average age is 33. You actually need to have the thinking around, if you want to get the talent, come to Western Sydney. And basically the training facilities that we have, we're going through a root and branch reform of what we do in TAFE in terms of how we actually build our training. So how we actually have a curriculum in place to actually be contemporary, how we deliver it, so more things like the skills exchanges where it's very much workplace based, where we're providing training on the work site. Partnerships, so we have a partnership at the moment where we're looking at seniors living but having training as part of a partnership with a seniors living company, and we're going through that process at the moment. But the thing I suppose that stuck with me is I was listening to a telecommunications firm saying to me that what they want in terms of their workforce is people who are comfortable working in a multicultural community. And I thought, well, that's actually the classrooms of Western Sydney. That's what we offer. And I think part of the rethinking we need to do is actually think about that as a competitive strength of Western Sydney, and actually look at those 160 languages we have is a foray into sort of global opportunities. So the training we have, we're actually really looking at that from what we deliver in terms of courses, the way we deliver, and that's not just about in relation to facilities, it's also in terms of face-to-face or online, etc., and understanding what the customer wants. So the basic thing we need to do is provide the trained people that employees want, or we're missing the mark. And we've got some work to do to get there yet.
Okay, and what about people getting to you? How critical is it that people can access the training and facilities that you have to offer?
Well, again, I think that was the point about making sure the training we provide is in a way that people want it provided, which is why it's so important to have the digital platforms as well as the face-to-face facilities. So we've just launched a part of our organisation called TAFE Digital, which will be providing that, which will be complementary with TAFE facilities. But the great thing is we have 21 facilities that are spread across Western Sydney, so we can provide training in place for jobs in place. So that's actually one of our really strong competitive advantages, that we're actually there in the centre of the communities in Western Sydney where we can provide that needed training.
Amanda, health is obviously a massive driver of employment across Australia, but in South and Western Sydney in particular, Liverpool, there's a focus, also Campbelltown. How important is it for you that people understand what's going on and are prepared to put their money where their mouth is? There's lots of talk. Are people backing it up with actions in terms of investing in research and the facilities that are needed to continue the expansion of health as a driver of employment?
So I think for us in southwestern Sydney, there really is a vibrancy at the moment. And reflecting on Jeff and the discussion this morning, health has done a lot of its work probably in a bit of an isolated way. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is this collaborative work that started to happen, where we've always worked with universities, but there's a difference and there's a significant movement now, I think, around how we're collaborating together in order to deliver at a higher level, I think, for our communities. So in places like Liverpool, we did a piece of work called Reimagining, the Liverpool site, and it brought together parties like TAFE, like our university partners, to really rethink what healthcare delivery would be like in Liverpool, and understanding that it's as much as a provider of healthcare, it is also a big economic driver, and it looked at both of those. But we weren't able to do that without our key partners, and having those other partners who really have a common goal in relation to what we want to provide in Southwestern, and as you've said, both in Liverpool and at Campbelltown. There's a real, I think, opportunity for us to really reshape what we're doing, and I think that's what we're starting to see. The precinct at Liverpool is very much built around the CBD area. Western Sydney University has come in, our work with TAFE, so our partners are close, but the ability of the work that we've done is to really reshape that whole CBD area, but we can't do it without local government. We need the livability component, and then what we heard about this morning is all of that's great, but we really need good transport links. So all of those parties together are what will deliver health at a much higher level. In Campbelltown, I think that precinct will create connectivity between CBD and the university, but again, the partners need to work closely together. So I just think for health in southwestern Sydney, this is a really exciting time. And just my other real comment, though, is about thinking about that whole job market. There are very much the core roles in health, but those core roles are changing. And so when we think about our partners who are working out there in the intermodal, 6,000 jobs, with a redevelopment at Campbelltown will move Campbelltown's employment probably to about 5,000 jobs internally within health. Then there's all the economic infrastructure that sits around that in terms of multiplying that by another 5,000 or another 10,000 jobs. So, I think it's an exciting time, and the opportunities through local training, local universities, is people can train locally, work locally, live locally. What a great opportunity.
Absolutely. And Paul, you should be careful what you wish for, so rather than coming to you first, I'm coming to you last. But commercial space obviously needed to attract certain kinds of businesses to Western Sydney. There have been challenges with approvals and getting projects off the ground in the past. What are the key hurdles, and how do we tackle those? Is the regulation, are there regulatory hurdles or barriers to investment that we need to be looking at? And are the project lead times feasible, or do you just give up sometimes and go away and put your money somewhere else?
Well, GPT's been a big supporter of Western Sydney. We have $2.5 billion worth of assets in Western Sydney. So we've been a supporter for a long time. I wouldn't necessarily say the regulation or the lead times is an issue. It's more the market. Projects like the Metro West and everyone in every single panel has talked about how important that is. But I think if you look at the Greater Sydney Commission plan and the regional plan, they've set up 3 different cities. I'd prefer to see it as a Sydney city plan, and at the moment it's not a 30-minute city as it describes in the plan. It's a 90-minute city essentially, because each of those 30 minutes is connecting back to its own city. The thing that's actually going to make it a 30-minute city is the metro, Sydney Metro, and that's the central spine that connects it, so you need the fewer number of stops connecting it. And if you then think about the economic growth, the reflective growth that Parramatta's going to get, and Sydney Olympic Park's going to get, and the Bays Precinct and the Eastern City connecting to the Western City ultimately with Badgerys Creek, that's really going to make Sydney a 30-minute city. So I think that's a big factor in creating growth in Western Sydney and creating, to the panel's name, showing more money. The other example that I want to look at internationally, because it's about how you attract commercial tenants. I think the world's best sort of urban regeneration example that's going on at the moment is King's Cross London. King's Cross London's where St Pancras Station, where the Eurostar comes in. And it was planned during the GFC, it was planned pre-GFC, and around 2004 it started sort of getting legs, and then the partnership culminated in 2008, and then they went to market trying to get a tenant. And they couldn't get any tenants, obviously it was during the GFC. And the first tenant they got was the Central St Martin's Art School. And it took the old heritage buildings, if you know that project. And suddenly the brand new art school, which is one of London's best art schools, cool, young, good-looking, trendy design kids started going into the area, and it created people and activity there all through the week. And then off the back of that, cafes moved in, bars moved in, and then everyone started seeing the activity. And then 3 or 4 different commercial tenants took it up, and then Google's now decided to build 100,000 square metres of Google space, new Google headquarters next door. And so it's created this 65-acre precinct of brand new urban regeneration, and the art school was a big transformer of that. So I think the government could be a little bit more strategic about how they relocate their sort of art and cultural facilities, and you could create big precincts around them. So move the National Art School to Sydney Olympic Park, for example, or move the AFTRs.
Sounds like they got lucky in London, but we could make our own luck here. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah, chuck in a loss leader and make it funky, and they will come. A question from the floor, and I would encourage you to stick your hand up if you've got a question for the panel. At lunch today, I heard a person say, "I support Western Sydney, but I don't want to go there." What do you think can be done to change this stigma and increase the appeal of Western Sydney? Paul, I'll go back to you on that one if I can.
Well, I sort of answered that question just around like having those cool cultural destinations. Look, we're the largest private land or leaseholder in Sydney Olympic Park, and I've had people say to me, like, Sydney, you want to have a big night out when you're going to an event at Sydney Olympic Park. You're excited, you're at an event, and then you just need to leave because there's nothing else to do. And Charles is speaking up next, and Charles and I, Charles the CEO of SOPA, we completely agree. And so when this master plan comes out, we want to change that, and we want to create a brand new... Sydney Olympic Park should be like the Fed Square East of Melbourne, where you can have an authentic experience where people go and soak up the atmosphere around an event day. So we need to create a real place that is not polarising, and it's there, and it's got broad appeal, and you want to actually be there and make a day of it when you go to an event. And I think if you think about a comparison example, the Melbourne CBD is like Sydney Olympic Park. It's got all the events, but people want to stay in the city because there's great things to do and there's great restaurants and great bars. That's why there isn't a commuter crush after a game in Melbourne. So we need to create Sydney Olympic Park like the Melbourne CBD.
And transport is underpinning all these things. The access obviously provides the opportunities. Danny, how important is that, and what else do you want government to do? Because we're looking at transport as almost as a given in a lot of these projects today. Whether they happen in the next 2 years, 5, 10, it is going to come. There are people who obviously want them to happen sooner rather than later, and I'd be one of them. What else, though, do we want from government to facilitate this kind of movement, to make sure that people have access to more great jobs, not just relying on the key strategic centres?
Look, I actually think the answer to that question is the private sector. I think the public sector has done their bit so far. We can argue that we need more infrastructure and should be faster, but the reality is they've given us a framework and a vision for that future, which hopefully is sufficient for the private sector. I think it's private sector that's going to create the jobs, and it's going to be the private sector that actually creates the attractiveness to work in Western Sydney. And it's those sorts of activities that Paul alluded to. I mean, when you think about it, it's about giving our young people an option. Today, I think, I sort of reflect on, people are really patient how they're prepared to invest 3 hours a day sitting in traffic to go to the job. But that's not actually being patient. That's because they don't have a choice, right? So it's up to, I think, largely the private sector to create the opportunities, create the choice, and then they can decide. And I think about our business, where we've got 2/3 of our people that work in our practice actually live in Western Sydney. And the other third actually live in the east and trek out to the west. So I think if we can provide career options and choices that currently don't exist, which is what really drove the Shaping Future Cities, Designing Western Sydney construct. Because if you look at the social impact of that, and we've seen some huge numbers about wasted productivity economically, then it becomes even more compelling, because the alternative is then, if we don't change the paradigm, we've got to probably build 6 more railway lines to the city, a number of motorways, and probably 1,500 more buses. So that's not actually viable. So if you think of the vision that Chris was painting of 2050, it's about creating options and choices for jobs that are really close to home. And then people can actually make that decision. Do I really want to trek into town, or do I want to work closer to home? And I think that livability, lovability that Lucy spoke to also serves to really create that atmosphere and that vibe where it's cool to be in Western Sydney, not that there's this sudden magnet that draws everybody east.
So has the private sector dropped the ball in? Are they not taking up opportunities, or are we just ahead of...
I think we're slow, if I'm honest. I think we could be moving quicker. And what, as I said earlier, you can start to see it now, that there are a number of businesses that have woken up to what Western Sydney offers. And I think that's the really exciting part, because once that gains momentum, it'll be like this snowball down the hill, and I just think it'll just gather more momentum and more momentum.
Yes, Amanda, please.
And I think the thing that we haven't talked about in relation to this, I think today, and not enough have we talked about it today, is around the image and our thinking about Western Sydney and what South-Western Sydney. We're talking about, what we want to see happen, what changes we want to see develop. But I think, can we not also lose sight of some of the really good things that are actually happening right now, today, in Western and South-Western Sydney? I look at the Casula Powerhouse. I look at a great article, I think, that was done either in the Herald or the Telegraph recently about eateries in Parramatta. It was really profiling the community in a really, positive, constructive, in a really fabulous way. So I think when you said, the question was around, why would I go to Western Sydney? It's up to all of us. We're the leaders out here. We actually have to create, not only the future over the next couple of years, but think critically about what's happening now and leverage off that and actually start to sell us as a place that this is the future for Sydney. It's not going to happen in 5 years. This is actually happening right now. These young kids that are coming to TAFE, the young kids that are going to Western Sydney University, that are going to this great facility in Parramatta. Liverpool's got its one being built at the moment. Where is the publicity? Where is the media? Where is the draw card to say, come now, because there are great things happening, rather than putting what we know to be the negative elements around some things that can happen in Western Sydney, that happen in communities all over Sydney. That's the thing that I think we need much stronger on board.
There's more television news on our local stations than ever before, because it's cheap local content and they get to meet their local content requirements. So I think there's probably an opportunity for those stories to be told, I hope. Paul, you talked about the Greater Sydney Commission's plans. I might put it to the other 3 panellists. They've released their draft regional and district plans. Do you think they've met the brief? And do we have the bipartisan support from, if the Labor Party happens to win the election in 2019, are they going to unwind any of this? Transport projects and otherwise?
Can I say, actually, one of the things that probably doesn't get enough credit is that what's happening in Western Sydney isn't an accident. There's lots of local government and local stakeholders that actually stepped up and actually got into the city building. Greater Sydney Commission has picked up on that and are sort of amplifying it, which is fantastic. But in terms of there's places like Liverpool, Penrith, Parramatta, Campbelltown, they're actually working out how they make their places more livable, which is actually fundamental to actually that publicity about being great places, about being creative places. So in terms of Greater Sydney Commission, all credit to them, they've actually taken on board that work. There's been work all over those locations around health and education precincts, work that was done by Deloitte previously as well. So it's actually been able to be brought and coalesced into a whole, which I think actually gives a bigger picture about Western Sydney. So I think the work that's been done there, that's got unstoppable momentum, quite frankly. It's actually going to continue to happen because there are a million people that are driving it. That's actually the important piece.
What are the competitive advantages you see in Western Sydney, Danny?
Well, there are many. The first of which is just the sheer talent that Michael touched on before. I mean, we've currently got the dream demographic. We've got incredibly young people that are bilingual and who are entrepreneurial. So we've actually got an incredible resource base, which if we can actually leverage to a greater extent, I think we will get multiple returns on investment. And when you start to think about an airport coming on stream, and I'm not suggesting we wait until it comes on stream till we do these things, because we are already doing them as a community, but when you start to think about the connectivity and the multicultural diaspora that we have in Western Sydney with that second airport, and the Minister touched on some of the industries that he saw around the Aerotropolis, but I think that was a reasonably, I think there are more opportunities beyond those 4 industries that he articulated, and I think that's the tremendous advantage is the fact that we have young people who are eager, who are really driven to make a difference. And that's one of the things that we're seeing in our own people is the people that want to work in our practice in Western Sydney are actually very motivated to make an impact that matters because it's actually their community that they're helping promote, which is, I think, to Amanda's point, it's up to all of us. And if you've got 2 million people singing the praises of the opportunity, that can only be a good thing.
Danny O'Connor mentioned earlier IT and the potential for it to make a big difference in, potentially not getting people to move around. Access and connectivity is one thing, but if you can do things remotely, access to education, health services, how important is a good, reliable NBN to the future of Western Sydney?
Well, I guess we've all...
Oh, no, you go, Danny, go on.
Well, I guess we've all had that frustrating moment. I had ours yesterday at home. The internet was down, and it's like the world's fallen apart. But in a sense it has. So having a reliable system is critical to not just business but our social way of life. We're the most connected society in the world with the number of devices that we've got. So I think that then leads to the fact that you can have an agile workforce, which means, do they need to come to a place of work and then commute? However, it's interesting, I think there was a forecast some 10 or 20 years ago that the internet was basically going to require that everyone could work from home and we actually didn't need cities but the fact is we're actually humans and we're social creatures, so we do like to interact, but there's no doubt that it's a blended solution, and I think where people can be smart is why do we all need to be on the same piece of infrastructure at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Let's extend the day out, whether we work from home earlier in the day or at the end, and then we kind of even out those peaks.
Absolutely. Amanda?
The impact for health, I think, from an IT perspective is really significant. I'll probably take Danny's thoughts a bit further and say IT really is the reshaper for health in terms of the future, not only in terms of technology for those high-end work that we do in our acute services, but that whole interface in the community with GPs, with primary care, whether it be through Skype or whatever the technology is available. Look, we've done some work recently with Samsung in terms of how they actually run their health services. You walk into a health service, put on a watch, takes your blood pressure, takes all your vital signs, tells you when to go to your outpatient clinic, gives you the results, puts them on an electronic EMR. Look, it's absolutely the reshaper around health, around what health will be like. And I think the challenge for us at the moment is there is, significant infrastructure investment in places like Campbelltown. The challenge we've got is we're thinking about building this hospital right now, but it will actually not open its doors for 6 or 7 years. And what does it need to look like in that time, and what will health be like? So that visioning and thinking about it is really, really critical. So as I said, I think IT is a reshaper for health for the future. Yeah.
Thank you. We are out of time, but just before I hand over to Christopher to talk about major events, I want to put this one to you. The state government has earmarked $2 billion for stadium upgrades, with a good chunk of that going in Western Sydney. Is that the right place for that money, or what would you like to see that $2 billion spent on? It's a good chunk of change. Paul?
It's a very political question. I think everyone's waiting to see where that money's going to be spent. I could give the sort of diplomatic answer or the controversial answer.
Controversial, please.
I've actually been thinking about stadiums, and stadiums in terms of infrastructure they're 95% vacant. And so, like, if you think about how they're used over the course of a week, so yes, they're amazing for a big event, but then are you getting the maximum efficient use of a significant piece of infrastructure? So then you go, well, what's the future of events and what's the future of live events? Do you need something that's a lot more multi-purpose that can be used 7 days a week? So I think the new stadiums and how they're designed need to be thinking about a 7-day-a-week active space as opposed to something that's 95% vacant. But I think if you speak to the future stadium operator people, they are also thinking the same way. But if I was going to spend $2 billion, I'd probably want something that was getting some more value from an efficiency for money perspective.
Yep. Michael?
I think in terms of, you'd expect me to say that probably more investment in training.
I don't expect you to say anything.
Yeah, but I think in terms of the whole thing around this is that it's actually not about where the money's spent. It's actually about how you leverage the opportunities where the money's spent. So for me, if the government priorities around stadiums and there's training that's around that, that's an important thing we need to leverage. So, I mean, government makes decisions for sound balancing reasons, but it's about how that then gets leveraged underneath. That's the critical piece.
Okay. Amanda?
So I am going to be controversial. Can have anything, can I just tell you? You can have your sporting events, you can have your digital platforms, you can have whatever, but you haven't got health and good health and quality of health care. You can't work, you can't play, you can't raise your families, you can't do all the things that are critical to life. So investment in health, to me, is a fundamental part of the build of any of our communities. So to me, an investment in Liverpool in terms of its next infrastructure requirements would be a good investment from government.
Thank you. And Danny?
Well, that's hard to argue against, isn't it? But I'm going to be a bit greedy and say, well, maybe we spend a lot of it on health, but maybe one of the things that we've seen throughout the course of the day is, I think, complete agreement on the importance of the steel spine. And as I understand it, the best guesstimate is when that might be operational, could be early 2030s. So would it not be a wise investment to actually seed fund and fast track that?
$2 billion down payment on the Metro West. Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel. Amanda Larkin from the South Western Sydney Local Health District, Danny Rezek from Deloitte Western Sydney, Michael Cullen from TAFE New South Wales, and Paul Walker from GPT.